All right, so today we're diving into something pretty complex,
Oh, yeah.
but super relevant, especially if you're prepping for the UPSC exams.
Definitely.
We're talking about the increasing pressure on the idea of universal human rights. We've got a ton of research here, articles, reports.
A lot to unpack.
We're going to pull out the most important bits for you guys.
Yeah.
And it's especially for those UPSC International Relations questions.
Always coming up.
They pop up all the time.
You gotta be ready.
But honestly, even if you're not taking exams,
Right.
understanding these critiques can help anyone
For sure.
navigate the world,
Yeah.
form your own opinions.
Absolutely. It's fascinating, really. The idea of universal human rights, this
Right.
belief that everyone, everywhere, has certain inherent rights just because they're human.
Just because they're human.
It hasn't always been around.
Right.
It really gained traction in the 20th century
Okay.
after World War II.
Yeah,
But since the 1970s, it's been facing some serious pushback.
So for decades, we've had this dominant narrative
Yeah,
that human rights are universal, coming from liberal thought.
exactly.
But now we're seeing some cracks in that foundation.
Big time.
And it's coming from both philosophical and political angles.
You got it.
So to really get this,
Yeah,
we need to understand the heart of these critiques.
absolutely.
One major challenge
Okay.
comes from communitarianism.
Communitarianism, right?
Think about how in many Asian cultures, family ties are incredibly strong.
So strong.
That sense of community
Yes.
shapes how individuals view their rights and responsibilities.
It's not just about you, it's about the group.
Not just about individual wants,
Right.
but what's best for the whole group.
Exactly.
So if you grow up in a society that prioritizes the collective good, the Western emphasis on individual autonomy
Yeah,
might feel a bit foreign.
totally.
Communitarians would argue then
Yeah.
that saying there's one universal set of rights ignores the very real differences
The differences.
in how cultures and societies function.
Completely.
They'd say trying to apply a single standard of rights to everyone.
Oh, yeah.
It's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
Like, it just doesn't work.
It just doesn't work.
Nope.
Makes sense to me.
Right.
But then we've got another group of thinkers,
Okay.
the postmodernists.
Postmodernism.
They throw a whole different wrench into things.
They really do.
So postmodernism.
This is a tricky one.
Yeah.
It's a whole philosophical approach
Right?
that questions whether any grand narratives or objective truths even exist.
Okay.
Think about Jean-Francois Lyotard,
Okay.
a key postmodern thinker.
I've heard of him.
He famously said
Yeah.
that postmodernism is all about incredulity towards meta-narratives.
Oh.
Basically, he's saying, don't buy into any big overarching story
Okay.
that claims to explain everything.
Don't buy it.
Right.
So if postmodernists are skeptical of any universal truth,
Yeah.
they'd naturally be skeptical of universal human rights, too.
Of course.
I mean, if there's no objective right or wrong,
Right.
who are we to say what rights everyone should have?
Exactly. That's the crux of it.
Postmodernists would argue that even the idea of human rights
It's a product.
is a product of a particular time and place and culture.
Absolutely.
Western thought in this case.
You got it.
So we've got some serious philosophical heavyweights
Big thinkers.
casting doubt on this whole concept of universal human
You're
rights.
shaking things up.
But the challenges don't stop there.
Oh, no.
We also have to consider the political critiques,
Yes.
especially those coming from a post-colonial perspective.
Right. Postcolonial thinkers.
Yeah.
They're bringing a powerful argument to the table.
Okay.
They're pointing out that pushing a single Western-centric set of rights onto the entire world
Yeah.
could be seen as...
A form of cultural imperialism.
Exactly.
They're saying, hold on a minute.
Yeah.
Who are you to tell us what our values should be?
It's a valid question.
Post-colonial thinkers argue that the West often imposes its own ideas on other cultures, sometimes overlooking the unique historical and social contexts of those societies.
For sure.
And this brings us to Edward Said.
Edward Said.
His work on Orientalism
Oh, important.
is absolutely crucial for anyone studying international relations,
Especially for the UPSC.
especially for the UPSC.
Yeah.
He argued that Western thought often creates these distorted, even demeaning stereotypes of other cultures.
It makes you think,
It really does.
isn't it?
Yeah. Are human rights truly universal,
Good question.
or are they just another way for the West to assert its power and influence?
It's a debate worth having.
So we've got these two powerful forces at play here.
Yeah.
philosophical doubts about the very nature of universal truth,
One side.
and accusations of cultural imperialism from postcolonial thinkers.
The other side.
It's like a pincer movement.
Squeezing the idea of universal human rights.
From both sides.
Yeah.
And this is where things get really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Because now we have to consider specific examples
Real world stuff.
of how these critiques play out in the real world.
Love it.
How have different cultures and societies grappled with this Western concept of human rights?
Mm-hmm.
And what alternative perspectives have they offered?
I'm ready.
All right, so we've laid the groundwork.
The foundation is set.
I'm already hooked. Let's dive into those real-world examples
Let's do it.
and see how this all shakes out.
I'm excited.
Let's get into some specifics.
Yeah, let's do it.
One of the most prominent examples
Okay.
we see is this concept of Asian values,
Asian values.
which has really gained traction in various East and Southeast Asian countries.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating because it challenges the very core
It really does.
of what the West often considers to be fundamental human rights.
At the heart of it,
Right.
Asian values prioritizes things like social harmony,
Okay.
respect for authority figures,
Right.
family ties, all of which are seen as crucial for societal stability and well-being.
So how does this clash then
Yeah.
with the Western, more individualistic view?
So in many Western societies,
Right.
individual rights are often seen as paramount,
As-
almost sacred.
I see.
But proponents of Asian values might argue that this hyper-focus on individual freedom can lead to societal breakdown.
Interesting.
They'd say that emphasizing individual rights above all else
Mm-hmm.
could erode those crucial social bonds that hold a community together.
So it's less about me first.
Yeah.
And more about we first.
Exactly, a more collectivist perspective.
Okay.
And this is reflected in arguments
Right.
that economic and social rights, things like the right to development,
Mm-hmm.
to a good standard of living,
Right.
to education,
Yeah.
should take precedence over individual civil liberties.
And we see this playing out
We do.
in some real-world examples, like the Bangkok Declaration of 1993.
Bangkok Declaration, right.
You always hear about it when studying for the UPSC exams.
Absolutely, it's a key document.
What's the main takeaway there?
So the Bangkok Declaration attempts to find a middle ground.
Okay.
It acknowledges the unique cultural context of Asian societies,
Mm.
while also trying to uphold the broader principle of human rights.
I see.
It was an attempt to, let's say,
Yeah.
reconcile Asian perspectives
Okay.
with the global human rights framework
Right.
that was largely shaped by the West.
It's almost like they're saying, look, we value human rights,
Mm-hmm.
but we need to understand them in a way that makes sense for our cultural context.
Yeah,
It's not a rejection of human rights altogether,
right.
but a push for a more nuanced interpretation.
Exactly.
And of course, we can't talk about Asian values without mentioning China.
Oh, absolutely not.
Right.
China's a major player.
China's a major player on the world stage.
On the world stage, for sure.
And their perspective on human rights is often quite different from what we see in the West.
Definitely. So China frequently defends its human rights record by pointing to its incredible achievements in poverty reduction
Right.
and economic development.
Yeah.
Their argument is essentially,
Yeah.
we've lifted millions of people out of poverty,
Yeah.
dramatically improved their standard of living.
Yeah.
Those collective socioeconomic rights are more crucial,
Mm-hmm.
they argue,
Wow.
than individual political freedoms,
Interesting.
especially given their unique context of rapid development.
So it's a bit like saying, look, we're focused on ensuring basic needs
Exactly.
and economic security for our people. That's our priority.
Precisely. And it's a viewpoint
Yeah.
that definitely challenges Western notions about the hierarchy of human rights.
Okay. So we've seen how the Asian values debate complicates things.
It adds another layer.
But there's another major critique we need to grapple with,
Oh, yeah.
and it comes from the Islamic world.
Another crucial perspective,
Right.
especially given the historical and political tensions between the West and Islamic societies.
Right.
Some Islamic scholars argue
Yeah.
that human rights should be grounded in divine law,
Interesting.
specifically Sharia law.
This is really interesting
Yeah.
because it raises the whole question of where rights come from.
It does.
Is it from God?
Mm-hmm.
From human reason?
Can be.
From social contracts?
Maybe.
It's getting pretty philosophical here.
It is.
And a key document to consider here
Okay.
is the Cairo Declaration on Human Rights in Islam,
The Cairo Declaration.
which was adopted in 1990.
Back in 1990.
Right, the Cairo Declaration.
Another one.
Another one that UPSC aspirants should be familiar with. Chris, what's the main takeaway there?
So the Cairo Declaration essentially presents an alternative framework for understanding human rights, one that is firmly rooted in Islamic principles.
All right.
It asserts that rights are ultimately granted by God, not by human constructs.
Interesting.
So any laws or declarations created by humans, even if they claim to be universal, must align with Islamic teachings.
So it's not necessarily a complete rejection of the idea of rights.
Right.
But a reinterpretation of their source and their limits.
Exactly. It highlights the tension that can exist between different sources of authority and values in our increasingly globalized world.
It seems like this Islamic critique, much like the Asian values debate, really pushes us to question.
It does.
Whether a single one-size-fits-all understanding of human rights can truly work for every culture and society on the planet.
Absolutely. It underscores the need for a more nuanced and multifaceted understanding of human rights. In a world where cultural and religious differences are front and center.
We've really gone deep, haven't we?
We have. It's a lot to think about.
It's clear that this idea of universal human rights, it's facing some serious challenges.
And I think what's so crucial for you, especially as someone prepping for the UPSC, is to be able to see the nuances of this whole debate. It's not a simple black and white issue.
Right.
There are valid points to be made on both sides.
Totally. And I got to say, reading all these articles and research papers, they're making me realize just how interconnected everything is.
It's all connected.
How can we even talk about human rights without understanding history, culture, politics, religion?
It's big picture.
It's all of it.
You got it.
It's like, before this deep dive, I thought I had a pretty good grasp on human rights, but now I see it's a much bigger, more complicated picture than I ever realized.
That's the beauty of learning, isn't it?
I guess so.
The more you explore, the more you realize there's always more to discover.
It's true.
And with a topic like human rights, the learning never really stops.
So true. But, okay, let's bring it back to our listeners. Especially those UPSC aspirants out there. What are some key takeaways they should keep in mind?
Well, first off, remember that understanding these critiques of universal human rights, it's absolutely essential for analyzing international relations and global politics. It equips you to engage with those complex questions.
Like what kind of questions?
Questions about state sovereignty, cultural diversity, the very nature of justice in this globalized world.
Because at the end of the day, this isn't just some abstract philosophical debate.
No, not at all.
These ideas have real-world consequences.
Real-world consequences, absolutely.
It affects how we address things like poverty, discrimination, armed conflict, the rights of marginalized groups.
It touches on pretty much every major global issue we face today.
So it's not just about acing the UPSC exam.
No.
It's about developing a deeper understanding of the world around us.
Precisely, and that's where things get really exciting for me.
I see where you're going with this.
Think about it. If the concept of universal human rights is truly flawed, as some critics argue, what alternative frameworks could we use to ensure dignity and justice for everyone?
It's a big question.
In a world marked by such incredible diversity.
Wow, that is a powerful question to leave our listeners with.
It is something to think about.
It's like we spent this whole episode deconstructing the idea of universal human rights.
We did. We broke it down.
And now we're asking, okay, so what's next?
Exactly. And there's no easy answer. It's a question that demands continued exploration, critical thinking, a willingness to engage with different perspectives.
So for all our listeners out there, especially those future diplomats and policymakers prepping for the UPSC, we encourage you to keep wrestling with this question.
Keep learning.
Read more. Listen to diverse voices.
Challenge your own assumptions.
The journey of learning is never ending.
Especially when it comes to these vital issues that shape our world.
And hey, if you found this deep dive helpful, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel.
And share this episode with anyone who's interested in international relations.
Absolutely.
Or just wants to understand the world a little bit better.
Until next time.
Keep those minds curious and engaged.